just want to talk a little bit about heroin and crack cocaine. So in terms of heroin, your type of people that use heroin, you often get this imagination, train stopping, this type of concept of these people. Are those the people that you were dealing with?
Yeah, I was dealing with, whenever I would go into an inner city area, I would look for the most vulnerable people, because the most vulnerable people are the easiest to manipulate. And quite often, the most vulnerable are the people who are using the largest amounts of drugs the most problematically. And they always know that the local sort of regional dealers, the step up the ladder. So the market that I was moving in really was the problematic market of heroin. Now, heroin's different to other drugs in that 25% of people who use it develop a problematic relationship with it, whereas with all the other drugs, it's around 10%, same as alcohol.
Right.
And of course, with heroin, problematic consumption can be very extreme, very, very, and with a policing background, you'll know just how much crime a very small cohort of people can commit to pay for a heroin habit. So that's the people I was meeting, and that's the people I would spend the most time with, because they are the most lucrative people. They're the people that organize crime. They want to exploit that group because they can get them to increase their consumption, to commit crime, to pay for it. So they're bringing in stolen property that they can trade as well. They're really very lucrative people to corner, which is the reason why we have county lines now. Police are very good at catching dealers through undercover work, through informants. The use of children is the perfect tactic in response to police success. And but the reason for that is because it's so lucrative. It's by far the most lucrative drug market, the problematic.
Do you think, has there been an increase or decrease in the amount of heroin and crack cocaine that's on the streets?
Well, the amount on the streets is just a response to the market size hasn't changed. No, it hasn't.
Right.
The numbers of problematic consumers of heroin and crack cocaine has stayed relatively stable, really, for the last 20 years. It went from about 1,000 in 1970 to 300,000 by 1984. And that's because we stopped prescribing it. We stopped medicalizing it. But it's stayed around that amount since. So it's not, there's figures to suggest that the production of cocaine has gone up by 35% in just the last 12 months worldwide. But that's not put more on the streets. That's just meant that the price has gone down and purity's gone up. That's because the market size has stayed the same.
So how do we tackle it? I'm getting a sense from you is that you're feeling that there's a way to deal with this, and it very much is around decriminalising.
Well, decriminalising is a good idea because we shouldn't be criminalising these vulnerable people who need help. We shouldn't be. But that doesn't, we have to look at this through a policing lens, and decriminalising doesn't go far enough, because the only way to take the power away from organised crime is to take control of the drug markets by legal regulation. It's all out of control at the moment. Who these drugs are sold to and what goes in these drugs is decided by organised crime, and that's not acceptable at all. So we need to take control. Now, it's not just me saying this. I'm part of the growing international movement of police and other law enforcement who are calling for an evidence-based drug policy. I'm from the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And what we advocate is for legal regulation of all the drugs. Now, how that regulation is formed depends on the relative risks of the drug. So heroin, for example, is actually the easiest to regulate because we've got the systems in place in the UK already. We used to have the British system, which meant that if you had a problem with heroin, you went to a doctor and the doctor prescribed it to you, which meant you were never going to be exploited by organised crime. There would never be any incentive for you to find more people to use heroin, more customers, because there's no business incentive. There's no finances involved at all. It's just between you and a doctor. And at the time that system stopped, there was only 1,046 heroin consumers in the UK. It went up to 300,000 in less than 15 years because the market was handed to organised crime. So for the other drugs,
No. I think that's very interesting. So basically, at the moment, my understanding is that doctors, the medical professionals, they prescribe methadone as a substitute. Is that right? They don't prescribe heroin, do they?
Well, there is still about 150 people in receipt of heroin through the British system in the UK.
Is that okay?
Yeah. And there was a trial in Middlesbrough where the problematic consumers were given heroin in a clinic in Middlesbrough, but that was shut down in December, really, through political cowardice, despite the fact that there was clear evidence that it was saving lives, improving people's lives, and dramatically reducing crime, like really dramatically reducing crime, as the evidence always shows. So it has happened. I think it's about to start happening in Scotland if they can just figure out the last bits of the licensing. So yeah, it can happen, but it needs to happen because overnight, if it was widespread, if heroin prescribing was widespread, it would almost eliminate almost all of the county lines drug dealing overnight. So it's desperate that we do this.
But would it? So bearing in mind, organized crime is about finances. You know, they don't care which area it is, and they go for the most profitable. Do you think that being supplied by your doctor would eliminate it to such a degree? So you could say, right, I want some heroin, I'm going to go and get it from my doctor. But what if you were then, actually, I want more than my doctor is going to prescribe? Are you not going to then go down the black market?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. And Switzerland, in 1994, they started prescribing heroin widespread to problematic consumers. And they used British evidence to inform their policy in 1994, at a point when we went the opposite way and went harder on it. As a result, Switzerland was the only European country to have a reduction in crime through the 1990s. Now, you'll remember how much crime was increasing through the 90s and how bad it was, just how bad it was everywhere. Not in Switzerland. They reduced their burglaries by 50% by doing this. And to answer your question specifically, in Switzerland, and just like the British system, if you found that you'd need, it's up to you to decide how much heroin you need. And in Switzerland, almost every patient increases their quantity every day because they want to keep having more. And they increase it on average between 6 and 8 weeks. And when they reach the 6 and 8 weeks point, they decide themselves, in almost every case, to start reducing it. Because their life has been stabilized, they're not having to spend all day trying to find the money for the next fix. They've got stability, they've got support, they're going into this clinic where it's being provided to them in a clean setting, and they can have counseling, therapy. They could even get a job if they want to, because they haven't got a chaotic life anymore.
That is quite fascinating, and you're saying empirical evidence is showing that actually works. But realistically, could that ever happen in this country?
Well, we have a history of it. We don't even need to change in the law to do that, because it's us that invented this system. It's called the British system, capital B and capital S. So yes, we can. We just need the growing political support for it, and it is growing. But it's just frustrating where in Middlesbrough, originally that scheme was paid for by the Police and Crime Commissioner, Barry Coppinger. And he did that because he's seen the evidence. He knew his crime figures would be better if he did it, and they were. But it's been a change of Police and Crime Commissioner who is more playing to the gallery with get tough policies rather than actually looking at the evidence of that policy.
And would you do that across every drug?
No, it's only appropriate for heroin and to a certain degree for people who are using crack cocaine problematically as well. But it would depend on there's a lot more work to be done in terms of who to decide to give that to. But for heroin, yeah, I would be much more liberal even than the Swiss system, to be honest, because the benefits are too important. And it's very important for us to dramatically reduce the exploitation of children, which that would do. For other drugs, you have entirely different forms of regulation, entirely different. So for cannabis, you have retail outlets, cannabis social clubs, things like that. And we have the evidence now from North America, which proves that a legal regulated adult cannabis market protects children better than prohibition does, because in every single jurisdiction in North America where the cannabis is legally regulated, underage consumption has dropped. Imperfect though most of their systems are, it is still good evidence, as we expect, that it protects children better, because in the UK it's far easier for our young to get hold of cannabis than it is alcohol or tobacco, because drug dealers don't ask for ID. And then,
fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Plug on.
So for the other drugs in between, you need licensed pharmacies where you have the regulated products. So MDMA, for example, the perfect example of the drug A drug that's not banned because it's dangerous because it's banned. And all of the deaths are because it's an unregulated product.
And so your focus very much is that what your work is very much around now, is to try to educate, how drugs, we have to change the policy in relation to drugs, and we have to change the whole way we police drugs?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a full-time activist as part of the movement, the worldwide movement. And, really, I'm still fighting organized crime. That's what I'm doing. But this is a more effective way of doing it, where we can actually beat them, or we can at least level the playing field. Because as the National Crime Agency says in their strategic assessments into organized crime, that the value in the illicit drug markets is routinely reinvested into other forms of criminality. Another way of wording that is that it makes other form of criminality possible, because you need that investment bank in order to do it. So we need to cripple organized crime, and that's why I'm active. Yes, but also we need to be aware. We need to be aware that how policing drugs is actually causing huge harm. The actual mechanism of policing it, because the police, in good faith, act on the law, and they will keep doing the warrants, they will keep making the arrests, they'll keep using the informants. But whenever you have a successful operation, you catch a kingpin character, a gang, or whatever, you create a gap in the market. That's an opportunity, and that opportunity is more often than not fought over. And so more often than not, in the wake of successful drugs operations, violence actually goes up. We've seen this. We see this through our criminal intelligence databases all over the world. This is noted by our membership in Baltimore or Melbourne in Australia. Violence goes up. And this is a very stark thing to consider within policing, through a policing lens, because you'll know that if you catch a burglar in a community, then burglaries are likely to fall, because there are a limited number of people committing that crime in a community. If you arrest a drug dealer in a community, crime will more often go up, not down, because you're not reducing crime at all by arresting a dealer.